Hello, 446ers. This is Sherry Weingart, and I am joined here by Shelly Ebbert, a public health leader in Illinois, and we are going to talk a little bit, have a conversation about the actual practical use of the economic analytics. And first I want to introduce Shelly because she and I have known each other over the span of many years, and it's been my pleasure to see Shelly in a variety of contexts for her public health leadership. I first met her when we both worked at the Cook County Department of Public Health, and that's a long time ago.
As health educators.
Yes, we were health educators, and the trick to being a health educator is to always have a trunk full of stuff. So now that we're a little bit older, maybe our trunks look a little bit less crowded. But we still are packed with experience, and that's what we're here to talk about now. The other contexts or other decision environments in which Shelly has worked include for the American Red Cross, for the Grundy County, she was the public health administrator of the Grundy County Health Department, that's in Illinois. You did that for several years, and being a local health administrator is involves a lot of decision making, as you can imagine, and a lot of forced choices, as we've discussed in the class. Shelly has also worked at the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, which is a huge nonprofit organization with many federal contracts, and it's a multi-layer organization that not only does policy work, but tends the tissue of services involved with HIV care in the Chicagoland area. Shelly has worked in the state as an advisor on aging in the Department of Aging, and Shelly was the president for a while of the Illinois Public Health Association, and she now works as the assistant director.
No, just a director.
Okay, director in a hospice system in the Chicagoland area. Shelly's expertise is established here. Our ability to speak well with each other is established, and so I'm going to start by asking you a few questions that bear on the issues of the use of economic analytics in the real world. What happened in 446 in 2012, that would be a year ago, is that I was teaching from the text about this is how you should do it and this is what should be done. And someone asked a very reasonable question, which was, does this actually happen? Because my impression from both the organization that I work in and talking with others is that usually decisions are made on the fly, and there really isn't a whole lot of serious analytic effort put in beforehand. So what I'm going to ask you is, what in your experience, let's say in your experience leading the local health department, were there times that, knowing what you know now, that you might have benefited from using economic analytics, or from doing a cost effectiveness analysis, or did it really not matter that much?
Well, I can answer that in a couple of different ways. I think that one of the things that's hugely different between then and now is the use of things like Excel spreadsheets. So when I put together a budget, when I was at the Grundy County Health Department, I was using ledger sheets.
Wow.
And so my ability to test whether the bottom line would change if I changed something was based on the speed of my eraser and writing with a pencil.
Wow.
And I know it sort of dates me, but I think that is a reality in the field, and it could be a reality in the field anywhere. If you're on the fly somewhere and you don't, and your computer systems aren't working, so you have to have some element of, if I change the equation, what changes?
And we teach that very briefly in HPA400 here at the School of Public Health, so that people will do a pro forma budget using an Excel sheet. It's just one lesson for one time, but it's important that we underline that there was a reason we did that.
Right, because you never know But at that time, when I was the health department administrator, I think where it could have been useful was when we were doing our community health assessment and plan, the I-Plan in Illinois. And it's very easy to look at the epidemiology and say your leading causes of death in our county are heart disease and cancer. And then the challenge of the local health department is, and what can we do about it? That's where you can go back and say, as a local health department, we receive a very small budget of our local health protection grant. How do we want to spend that? And what's available to us and what has the biggest bang for the buck? So, so that you might go into, well, we know that tobacco cessation has an impact on all these things, and it's got a pretty big bang for the buck. And even though it doesn't say heart disease on the top of it, in your annual report, it's going to give you some of the effectiveness that you want.
And this is a problem about selling a program, because if the benefits don't accrue within the time frame, either in business it's the quarter or the year or the life, even a 5-year time span, if you don't see the results of an investment in prevention within the short-term decision horizon, people like to go for, and sometimes there's did you ever feel a pressure from your board or the community saying, well, we need to demonstrate the wisdom of this decision more promptly?
I didn't experience it at the health department per se, but like you said, I've been involved in the Illinois Public Health Association for a long time. And at one time we were looking at how a particular grant, the formula for the local health protection grant. So every health department receives a cut of this big line item in the state health department budget based on the sort of the size of the county and the needs and the relative ruralness and that type of thing. But we also needed to advocate for that line to become bigger. And so at one point we put together this campaign, all the health departments put together this campaign called the 1% solution. So if we got a 1% increase in the local health protection grant, what would that improve over time? But it was the same challenge that you just said, and now I just realized another value for a cost utility analysis, because the bottom, the denominator is cost per quality of life year. That's right. So it standardizes it in real time, if you can get your legislators to understand what that means.
The education process that's part of policy making and that's part of explaining, we're all in an organization, but the whole point of this course is being able to defend and explain the challenges and our preferred solutions to health resource conflicts and limitations. So I think what your last point, I just want to punch that up, is that the education process for the validity and utility of the kinds of thinking that we're covering in the course this week, I think is very important. I want to ask you about a time in your tenure at the AIDS Foundation of Chicago when I know that you collectively made some very rigorous use of both academic articles that had to do with research about the relative effectiveness and cost effectiveness of interventions, and everyone should know that you'll be seeing, if you haven't seen it already in terms of the order, you'll be seeing an Adobe Connect session that Shelly's doing that explains in ordered detail through a PowerPoint the process that was used in the situation that I'm about to ask you to explain. What was the precipitating reality that made a very hard-driving, time-pressured, complex organization sit back and say, we have to look at this thing? What was the precipitant? What was the decision you had to make?
Well, I think it was in the context of several pressures. One was that a lot of the funding that we were using at the AIDS Foundation for services for people with HIV was from the Health Resources and Services Administration, which is different than the CDC. They're a healthcare provider. And so what they were looking at was, if we are spending money on services that are ancillary to health services, are they having health-related outcomes? And in the case of HIV and AIDS, it's like, are they improving CD4 cell counts, which is making somebody's immune system stronger? And are they reducing viral loads, which is making this person less infectious? And we had to measure that for things like substance abuse treatment, for mental health services, for emergency housing, and that type of thing. At the same time, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, had a program called HPA, another acronym, Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, that provides housing subsidies. And that was always, HUD is always at the bottom of the federal budget.
Yes.
It's the HUD and VA, it's like they get the scraps. And so I think that they were also looking at, if we want to continue to support HPA, what's the advocacy point? Is it really useful in a health sense? And so taking
not just as a matter of
right.
Moral rightness, people
Right.
ought to have housing,
Right.
Especially when they're sick, that we don't leave people out in the
Right.
cold. But you have to make the case, even though
Yes.
the moral imperative seems to be clear.
That's exactly right. And it was making the case in a health way. And I think AIDS has been at the cutting edge of this type of evaluation since the beginning, because it's a health issue that came on the scene later than many other health issues. And so we've looked at it differently from the beginning, from the way that the services are planned for, to the way the services are delivered and evaluated.
So tell me how you got to this research.
We got to this research because, again, we're an advocacy organization as well as a service provider, and wanting to make the case for why should anybody invest in housing for people with HIV. And there was the opportunity to participate in this multi-site national study through CDC and HUD and HRSA. It was multiple sponsors of it. And so we were already looking at what's the impact of housing on health in general. We'd made a strategic decision in our organization to participate in yet another sort of multi-site and multi-funded housing for health investigation, and we were just like, yeah, this is the right thing to do.
But you didn't know what the points that you were going to stress, or the kind of policy levers, the arguments, until you made a careful, planful kind of study of research that had been done in this regard. And so I think that everybody's going to benefit very much from seeing in detail the work that Shelly's referring to. I want to make one observation. Last summer, when it was raised that I don't think this is done very much, I made the point, and I'll make the point here, that the time to conduct a cost-effectiveness analysis is not when there's an epidemic. It's not when your funding's being yanked. It's not when you are 4 minutes from implementation of a new program. The time to understand that you will have to eventually confront these things in a planful way and to make use of the analytics is beforehand. In other words, we're taught a lot, and I remember when I worked in emergency preparedness, there was always the theme that you do not meet the people with whom you're going to collaborate in the emergency at the table in the Joint Operations Center when you have the hot situation. The only thing that lets you work well together in the hot situation is the fact that you have built relationships, that you have pre-planned, that you have exercised, that you have anticipated the need to do X and Y. And so my take home from that is that there are certain crises, if you will, or real hard choices that are predictable. The exact dimension of them may not be predictable, but that one working in a health department can pretty much predict that there will be an outbreak of something that they have to confront, and that they'll need supplies for, and that they'll need to figure who will get this vaccine or this intervention or this prophylaxis. What are the guidelines that we'll have to make, etc. How to avoid. We will have to ration, so how will we do that? So we have to make the analytics work for us anticipatorily. We have to do that work beforehand. We also have...
well, and can I just say that, that it can't be, that as a public health practitioner, you can't just abdicate the cost of your program to the finance director. Like, you can't just say that, oh, well, that must be what the costs are, because that's what it costs to run the program. I think that looking at it even a tiny bit more in terms of the benefits or in terms of the cost of illness that you're preventing gives you as a program manager much more credibility and something to talk about when budgets come around, and to know that the costs are not just part of that annual budget. Typically an organization only looks at dollars and cents, on a monthly basis, like how much did you spend and what are you going to spend next year in the annual planning. But this is much more than that. This is looking at the value of something and creating a case over time. A case over time that is totally integrated with the organization's strategic planning. And mission. And the mission and how you're going to carry this out, and who gets more of you than somebody else. You exist maybe for everybody, but you are going to make priorities, and so understanding that beforehand is vital. The other thing is that we can't, sometimes in the organizations that we work in, we don't have, and we're not teaching you how to do this in any detail in this course, we don't have the precise expertise. We're not economists. We're not, we don't sit in an office all day and do these analytics. So making the relationships, for example, with a university or with some other kind of research body, or just with an interorganizational way, so that a system has a capacity. A specific unit or organization doesn't necessarily have to have the capacity to do detailed analytics, but somehow they have to be embedded in a system from which they can draw that resource. So we want to underline that this is part of planning. This is part of prophylaxis, because there are anticipatable, preventable crises about budget decisions that will have to be made, and your priorities therefore, and that the resource for doing that is often, even for a small organization, to be had with bonding with others, again, before you get to the hot table. Right. And I would say that some of those players, as you're talking about this, I'm sort of thinking about, well, who's the emergency response team, or who's the economic analysis team? And it would certainly include me as a program person, but it would include an epidemiologist. It would include your whoever runs your data system, if you have client level data. That's right. It would include your finance people also, because that what I've learned in reflecting on the cost effectiveness analysis is how important concepts from EPI are, because your risk ratio becomes a multiplier for some of your costs, for example. So it's real important to think about who could be on that team. Indeed. So thank you so much, Shelly, for it's my pleasure.
Helping us put the flesh and the kind of empirical aspect of this before our students. And welcome to Cost Analytics, and we'll speak to you soon.